Yuck.
And it's recording. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Once again, and thank you for all watching it all. Today, actually, I've got a very close friend, long-term friend, and long-time comrade of mine, Helen Whooley. I've known him for many, many years now. We're very active in the Communist Party there for a couple of years as well. Yeah, we actually, but Helen, when we were living in Perth as well, we were over there, and we've been obviously in many struggles together. So, Helen, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a bit about yourself, your background, and anything you've been involved in?
Hi, everybody. As Dave said, my name is Helen. I've been a worker all my life since I started working. I left school relatively young at 15 and started working in factories. I've been a bus driver. I've been a truck driver. I've worked in the mines. I've worked in all sorts of industries. I managed to get a teaching degree along the way. And so at present, I'm working for the CFMEU as a teacher trainer in the high-risk area and in occupational health and safety. I've been involved in quite a few different organisations, and unfortunately, having children and various other things kind of take over, and so I've never stayed in organisations for a long period of time. I'm not entrenched in party politics as such, but fully support the concept and the ideas of workers needing a representation of their own. And to that end, I guess I should say that I just recently stood as a candidate in the local government elections for the Hobsons Bay Council in Victoria.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. We'll talk about that in a minute. And can you just let the audience know, especially from mainly for overseas listeners or viewers that will be watching this, what the CFMEU stands for?
Sure. It stands for the Construction, Forestry, Mining, Energy Union, and actually just recently it's amalgamated with the Maritime Union as well. So it is actually called the CFMEU. Which incorporates the MUA.
Right. Well, no more amalgamations because the abbreviation's getting more complex. You might as well start and go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Yeah.
Exactly.
No more. All right. Well, welcome aboard. And obviously, yeah, you just touched on it as well. You recently ran in the local government elections, I believe, as a union candidate on behalf of We're Union. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, it kind of arose out of, and this is purely my own interpretation of it, but I don't think it's incorrect. It arose out of the elections that took place really in federal elections where the Labor Party did so badly. And it was predicted that actually the Labor Party should have won those elections, and they failed to win the federal election. And for the union movement that had put a lot of effort and a lot of energy into getting the Labor Party elected, it was very disappointing. So out of that arose a kind of community based union solidarity movement, and each different little area had their own organisation based on the unions. The one that I was involved in, for instance, was called United West. We are Union United West, and I know that you were involved in one as well, Dave, in your area. So it arose kind of out of that, and so out of that, then the Trades Hall thought that they would run a campaign that would get people from those organisations elected into council. And I think that concept is a really good concept. It's we need to have political political rule, if you like. We need to start challenging the status quo. We need to have at the table, at the big seats around the table, we need to have workers' representation. So I think the idea is a really good one. Of the 12 that ran as candidates, 3 people were elected in these local elections. So that was really good. 3 unionists basically that are now representing workers in Victoria across the state. So I think it was a great achievement. It just needed we needed to tweak it a wee bit more. We needed to understand a wee bit more about what councils are all about and so on. And so some of us were fairly inexperienced, and I would certainly put myself in that category. But also having said that, COVID-19 was particularly trying in terms of how much we could do, how much campaigning we could do, and so it was kind of it was all online based. It was all Facebook and technology based campaigning, and for some of us that was challenging. So the next time around in 4 years' time, I think we'd have the opportunity to do it way differently than this time around.
Yeah, and actually, I'll just comment there too, because obviously haven't got the big bucks, big dollars coming in like the major parties would when they run in these elections, like the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, but especially the Liberal Party. I believe they were really going feral, trying to see some local governments around the country as well, especially up here in Bendigo. They put on fronts, they put on front groups, the whole lot to try and disrupt it, and the amount of candidates was phenomenal. Even one of the candidates, Luke Martin, who's the Secretary of Bendigo Trades Hall Council, but ran on the Wear Union ticket for Bendigo in the ward of Whipstick. There was about 12 candidates. Well, it's phenomenal. And obviously there was a couple of candidates we didn't want brought up, and unfortunately he didn't either. But yeah, that certainly is I think one thing about I suppose any elections from a local, state or federal or Commonwealth elections, their fact is, at the end of the day, it shows you too the unfairness of the capitalist system, where it's only the capitalist parties, it's the big major ones that are fully funded and able to dominate the whole thing, where it's anyone that's genuine working class candidate, be it he's running on an independent union ticket or ex-party, whatever, they've still got that lot of disadvantage because they're not funded, they haven't got the actual big bucks behind them to really run a good campaign. So it's a real salt of the earth type campaign, I guess, for you. So, I think it's also too, I was like, ask you, thoughts on about running in elections and the importance for working class people to do so.
Yeah, and I guess I think it's very important. I think that we need to challenge the system on all different types of levels, and I think traditionally the left and workers haven't done that. We've left it to the Labor Party, and we've left it to the unions, and we've left it to organisations to represent us, and that's not going to keep working. We need to start finding our own sources of power, if you like, and we need to start representing ourselves at all sorts of different levels. And I think that's one of the reasons that I decided that I would stand. I certainly didn't think that I would be elected, and that was the case. Yeah. But I think that it was important that people see that there are now workers standing up to, as I said, to take a place at the big table, if you like. The Labor Party is not representative of the working class. They've shown that time and time again, and in fact haven't been representative of the working class since about the 1970s, the 1960s, and they don't even profess to support the working class. They don't use that terminology. They don't talk about things on a class basis, and in fact they see the middle class as being more important to getting votes and to getting them elected than the working class. They kind of distance themselves from the working class, except for, of course, the union movement contributes quite a fair bit of financial support to the Labor Party, and so they've always got to pretend, if you like, or give some kind of lip service to the unions, and because of the financial support they give them.
Yeah.
So I think it's time that workers recognise that we can do this. We have a wealth of experience, we have a wealth of knowledge about how our system works, and if we don't, then we need to be taking up positions so that we can learn it. And that's the key as well. If we don't start to get the experience about how the system runs, then we can't work out ways to change it. We can't understand our enemy if we don't start to understand how they run things.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you actually raised that, because without workers being involved, how they're going to gain experience further in struggle. And obviously, when I've done talks, the three level forms of struggle: the economic, the political, and the ideological. Which all three go together. And it's important that those struggles are developed further from lower to higher levels. And I think running in elections, it's really putting a good voice, working class voice, and a message forward that's out there. And because obviously everything's dominated and with the corporate agenda or capitalist agenda, then usually when it's anything that's working class, it's mainly lip service or a few breadcrumbs. And I know it's like, even with the ALP, usually I've seen them on many election nights, and they're thanking the union movement, but when it's actually putting forward, it was the union movement that made them in the first place. They've done a lot of these things, and even a lot of things we do enjoy in our life, they either pay lip service to it or just completely ignore that at all. I made a comment to someone in my union the other day about the ALP. Actually, I said the ALP would fall apart if the union movement walk away from it altogether. Not every union's affiliated to it. There's some that's not, but if they all just withdrew their money and then affiliation walked away from it, the thing would collapse.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll know where they'd go. So it's quite a contradiction on their behalf. They want to curtail to the middle class and the capitalist class, but and ignore the working class, but in its unions. But that's the core that's keeping it all together in the first place. So if it'll be interesting. I mean, at the moment, next year, obviously federal election. Well, be more talk about federal election. I believe it can be called any time from September next year through to May in 2022. It'd be interesting to see what comes around. But at the moment, we're looking at Morrison to get back in because he's too much popular support. But and my criticisms of the Labor Party, because especially they just follow basically what the Liberal Party's been doing. There hasn't been much opposition from what they've been doing at all. So it's not my only criticism. It's usually a million and one. But it was just go actually step back to last federal election. What was interesting though, the Labor's vote increased here in Victoria, but everywhere else it collapsed. And I just wondered, what do you think would be the reason behind that?
Oh, I think there was a massive media campaign, and against the Labor Party. In particular, the question of mining taxes, I think it was that, or no, there was the major question of franking credits and so on. And the media just ran a massive campaign against this idea that somehow the Labor Party shouldn't eliminate franking credits. And franking credits, we know that working class people don't have franking credits. Yeah. Just don't have enough money to get franking credits, and yet the wealthy buy up franking credits, or they get these franking credits, and they earn every dollar a dollar for a dollar, and they're not doing anything. It's a ridiculous situation. So for the Labor Party to say that they were going to get rid of that was, they could have explained it better. They could have maybe done something differently, in the way they approached it. But essentially, the media here ran a campaign against it, and it looked like the Labor Party was going to take money from everybody, or from ordinary people that had franking credits. Well, not ordinary people have franking credits, and that's something that the Labor Party didn't fail to kind of explain. That really the only people that have franking credits are wealthy people. Yeah. But I guess that comes down to another question as well, and that is that the Labor Party may have been talking about franking credits and taking it away from the wealthy people and so on, but again, that's just attacking individuals in the system. It's not looking at the overall problem of what's going on in the system. So why wasn't the Labor Party talking about taxing multinational companies, which we know pay no taxes here in Australia? So why weren't they being attacked? And I'm sure that the unions and workers would have supported that as an idea, rather than attacking individuals and saying, oh, we're going to take your franking credits away from you, blah, 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 or we're going to stop negative gearing, or all of these kind of perceived privileges that we have, and they're going to take them away. So why not attack the real cause of poverty here in Australia, and attack the real causes of inequality, and that is that, that multinational companies are paying no taxes.
That's right.
And taking all their money offshore. They're raping Australia. They're taking all of the natural wealth, and that doesn't belong to them, that belongs to the people of Australia, and yet paying no taxes for it. And it doesn't happen in other countries. There are the Scandinavian countries, for instance. The multinational corporations are happy to pay 30% taxes or whatever, because they're still making 70% profit. But if they don't have to pay, then they won't pay. Why would they? The system's geared up for them, and if they can avoid taxes, then they will.
Well, see, that's an interesting discussion, because I know with the multinationals paying taxes, that especially for the last 10, 15 years, especially from the mining construction boom in Western Australia, and the likes of Chevron, Woodside, but Shell, but also how much taxes the iron ore sector actually pays. I mean, basically the royalty that comes from iron ore is basically the cost of, from how much the iron ore will cost when it just comes out of the ground, not when it leaves. It's not royalty on when it leaves port or when it's sold on the Singapore Stock Exchange and sold up to the world level. And obviously that's in a lot of ways, it's less income coming into the state government or the federal government's coffers. And when the respective state governments tried to take the mining companies on about taxes and that, they've obviously, that was there was actually such a big backlash against, from all the multinationals. Murdoch along with it. I mean, the role of the Murdoch media, and just on there, you probably aware Kevin Rudd along with Malcolm Turnbull with a petition. It's now lodged in the federal parliament. Over 500,000 people have signed onto it. That's incredible. And Rudd just made an announcement a couple of days ago, which was shared up from social media, that he's not backing down. All this persistent. And he's still been persistent on it, but the backlash against from the Murdoch empire has been phenomenal. It's real nasty stuff, but it just comes to show the reason why they do it, because they're under threat. But obviously it's good if it's someone, even it doesn't have to be the Labor Party, but anyone, if they start raising the issue about taxing and questioning their whole profit motive, just how phenomenal the attacks are.
Exactly. As soon as we start to threaten the status quo or their profit margins, then countries are under attack, and individuals are under attack, and it's very difficult for individuals to to deal with that, to fight back against those kind of attacks. But by the same token, if you're being attacked by the Murdoch media, then you know that you're doing your job. You know that you are hated because of the things that you're saying, and so you're doing a good job then, And I think that comes on to the next point, or to another point really, is and that's the issue of Iran and China, and and Venezuela, of course, and Cuba, and Syria and numerous other countries that are being attacked by the Murdoch media and by US by the US media, and that is that they're sovereign nations. They're independent. They're not kowtowing to US imperialism. They're trying to develop their nations in an independent way, and fortunately they're forging ties with each other as well to do that. Yeah. And as a result of that, they face the brunt of US imperialism's soared.
Yeah.
And of course, the US imposes sanctions on countries that it doesn't like. It's threatening war, essentially, and through economic war, and through physical war, it's threatening these countries. And
proxy
by
war.
the same token, therefore, it's threatening the working class around the world.
Yeah.
So when we hear these statements of aggression against these countries that are independent, we need to stop and think that these countries must be doing something right if the media is attacking them. They must be doing something that the media, that the conglomerates and the big business, they must be doing something that they hate in order for the media to be vilifying them so badly.
Well, it's interesting
because they would do it to individuals, and as you said, they did it to Gillard when she tried to introduce a mining tax, and they did it to God, what was his name? Shorten, when he tried to introduce franking, eliminating franking credits and negative gearing and so on. So the vilification of these people and these countries almost proves that they are doing something correct.
Yep. Well, it's interesting here because basically the Murdoch empire, besides being the mouthpiece not just of Rupert Murdoch, but of the international bourgeoisie of US imperialism. Obviously, it's sometimes obviously you can just see how ferocious in the media attacks, how they whip up all this hatred, whip their audiences into such a frenzied state that there's no common sense of logic coming through this. And obviously, I've seen how people have had all their sources of information has been from the Murdoch empire. They've never seen anything else. But what was been interesting, and actually I noticed been noticing this a lot. Like I'll go into a newsagent's or down to the supermarket, and the amount of newspapers like Murdoch's, the Australian or the Herald Sun, or the Herald Scum, as otherwise known as, or the Smelly Telly in Sydney, they're basically they're big piles of them. It's like not enough people are buying them anymore. They're just sitting there. And I've actually seen people give them or try to give them away. No one wants to touch them. And it's just so interesting. I think a lot of people out there can probably see through that too, that the sources of information from there, both newspaper or electronic or on television. He's got the Sky News, the same as Fox News in the US. It is just completely terrible. And I don't even regard it as journalism. It's just gutter trash. That's really all it is. But and it's also too how they actually paint people. Like for example, they call the Syrian government the Syrian regime. I mean, it's like a new regime. They're not. They're a democratically elected government with popular support by vast sections of Syrian society. And also how they portrayed even Daniel Andrews here as dictator Dan. I mean, well, you and I know actually a lot of people who've lived under dictatorship, and they can tell you what they'll tell you what a real dictatorship's all about. But it just gives you an example of how they portray it and try and whip people up in a certain frenzy. I've also seen what they've done all around the world with the countries they operate. What was interesting, I don't know if you recall, back in, I think it was 1989, it was in Liverpool with that soccer stadium disaster accident, and how the Murdoch media portrayed everyone there in Liverpool, and accusing them of all sorts of things which were so untrue, actually outright lying. But no one from there has bought the Sun ever since. And I think that it's quite remarkable for people in Liverpool to do that. You're not welcome here, Murdoch, and we're not touching it. So I think that was well, that's one thing. And actually, just flying on from Kevin Rudd's petition, I mean, that's something that we'd probably look to do. Is like, we won't touch his papers, touch his Sky News, and I don't know if you subscribe to it, unsubscribe, and have nothing to do with it.
And I think the question of elections and leads on to the whole question also about democracy and what it is, and whether we actually have it or not. Do we have democracy in Australia? Do we? And if we do, is it real? Is it real democracy? Is there a better democracy? Is there a different way we could be doing it? And I think I think what was highlighted to me in terms of this election was that we don't really have a democracy in Australia and in the West, in fact. And that was brought home by the fact that, you know, here was we were running elections in a pandemic, which meant that nobody could do any street stalls, nobody could leaflet, nobody could even drop things in people's mailboxes. We were on a total lockdown, and yet they still held an election during that period, which was completely unfair, especially for people, you know, that didn't have lots of money behind them, and where our usual form of campaigning would be around street stalls and around leafleting at railway stations and door knocking and so on. And if we didn't have the opportunity to do that as new candidates, then really the whole thing should have been postponed for at least 6 months to a year until this pandemic was over. Because what it really meant was that the incumbents, or the people that were, you know, had been previously elected, they were the ones that were going to be elected this time round as well, because there was no other opportunity for new candidates to have a voice. And I think that's certainly the case in most shires, was that the incumbents got re-elected. And as you said, a lot of money was spent trying to get these candidates elected. And you know, there's a saying about something about politics and doesn't exist in local government, and yet you find that the Liberal Party spends an awful lot of money getting Liberal people elected. They don't say that they're from the Liberal Party, and they don't get endorsed by the Liberal Party, but they are Liberal Party people. And so when we elect these kind of people, we're electing people that have an ideological base behind them, and that means that the way that they function is not representative of ordinary people, but representative of the class of people that they align themselves with. And so we're ending up with lots of Liberal Party people, you know, or if they're not Liberal Party people, they're closely ideologically aligned with the ideas of the Liberal Party, and that is the support of business over people. And so they're getting elected to local council. And it's really interesting to actually, I had to sit in on I sat in on a few local debates and so on. And I was impressed. I was impressed with their, with the way that they were so articulate and so good at answering questions that, you know, that they answered it in such a way that they weren't giving anything away, but they answered it so well that you thought that they were going to give you something. You know, it was pretty incredible. And we'll find, of course, that now that the elections are over, that the voice of the people won't be heard at all, because now that they're elected, they don't actually have to listen to the people, and that's for another 4 years. You know, and we continue to put our trust in a system that really is not democratic, and yet we don't seem to. We haven't yet progressed to a point where we're saying, well, hang on, what else can we do? What else can we do that would make it more democratic, you know? And I think that we need to go to look at the grassroots base of people and start saying, you know, we need to form alternatives. And when we form those powerful alternatives, we can go to council and say, you know what, we've got, so in my local area, we've got 15,000 houses. If we formed a local community group that was really democratic, that met every 2 weeks, and maybe only was in, you know, every committee was only a mile wide or a kilometre wide, a kilometre squared, and every single one of those little estates, they elected somebody, and then, you know, and then they those elected people got together and they discussed things, and then they took it back to the meetings, and then you could go to council and say, you know what, we represent, of those 15,000 houses, we represent 10,000 of those houses, and here's what these houses are saying. And we would know that we are truly representative of the people, because we are meeting with the people constantly, and the people are constantly telling us what they want.
Keeping them engaged. Yep.
Keeping it engaged and so on, and lots of community involvement and community discussion. The way we have it right now, we go to the polls every 4 years. There's no further discussion with the people. Oh, okay, look, they might put out a blueprint for something, and it might be on their website, and you can go and look at it. But do we actually have any power to change anything? No, because we have no representation. So we need to start having the discussions with local people about how can we make things more democratic. How can we get true representation? And it's certainly not through things like council meetings and so on. I think that's reiterated to me. I always knew that we don't live in a democratic society, but seeing the way that these things operate, I know more and more that it's not democratic. But I think there's things that we can do to make it democratic, to force the issue of democracy on our existing structure.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've always had a look at, because I think it's just been a habit of just getting people elected to Parliament, and that's it. And we just leave them up. Oh, well, we elected you to do this, where really we needed the mobilisation on the ground to back that up. And I think for many years, whilst there's been a choice between Liberal, Labor, whoever gets in, just vote them in or out on election day. And to me, that's just been totally, what's the word, just disconnected from the whole process altogether. And I think it's, I remember during the Howard years, on the year we voted him out was 2007, actually November 2007. And there was all this big fanfare. Yeah, we got rid of Howard. He even lost his seat, But I said, you've got to do more than change your government. You've got to change the system. And it'd be good when we do get genuine working class candidates in there, worker politicians, not politicians, but we actually worker politicians that they're supported through mass action on the ground. So they've got that momentum, because I think some people thought, well, it was just exchanging a few bums on seat in Parliament, and hopefully they'll deliver on what we answer for. Well, where was the mass mobilisation even in 2007 after Rudd got in, after Kevin Rudd got in as Prime Minister with his cabinet and that? But there was no mass mobilisations afterwards to back it. All we got was the Unfair Work Act and not much else. And still we had crippling penalties towards workers who perform industrial action, and we're seeing an economy going spiraling out of control. So that's it's interesting how people are going about it. It's not a matter of just picking up or nominating, running an election, or voting for someone, because they might have a few good policies, but even if they don't get to fruition, it needs to be backed up all the time by mass action. And that's why I always believe our people should be involved, and like you correctly point out, also engaging people on that local level so they're consistently involved in the decision-making process. Because in Australia, as soon as we get people into Parliament, or whatever, local decision-making is all done behind closed doors. Everything's pre-decided. Like I explained about the trade agreements, it's all done in secret. It's all done in secret, and then the major parties direct their members of Parliament to, right, you're voting for it. They don't read it. They just go, okay, yay or no, yay, yeah, and just do as they told them. To me, that's not being democratic at all. Far from it. I think it's a very superficial democracy, Australia. But yeah, if I think it was this grand illusion that we're free and democratic. Well, what does that mean, really? Free to do what? Democratic to do what exactly?
Yeah, and I think if we realise that for every economic system that's existed, there's also been a political system that manages that economic system, and that's what we have. We have a system that is based on capital, on finance first, finance before people, finance, profit before people by hook or by crook. and we have a political system that manages that economic system, and they're not separate, and they're not, no matter how many parties we have that say they're independent in the system we have, they end up managing capital for that economic system. And it's not till we force change, it's not till we decide that people should come before profit, that we will then have a political system that represents people rather than profit. Yes. How do we get to that? Well, we need to start building at the grassroots level. We need to start participating more firmly and more strongly in the so-called democratic process. A, to gain experience, and B, to know our enemies more closely, and also to learn how to run a society. We have to begin to learn how to run the society for ourselves, because otherwise we will never be able to change it.
Yeah.
So there's key reasons to for people to get involved at the grassroots level in local politics.
And that's right. I think it's good way to actually good message to put out to everyone. We need to have that experience and learn how to do it ourselves. I mean, because no one's going to change it for us. An old saying, our forebears said, no one's going to fight your battles for you. You're going to do it. And I think we'll learn how to do it ourselves, start taking it back in our own hand. Actually, I find that empowering, really, if we do, because that's quite empowering. We actually start to have control of our own destiny for once, instead of having been dictated to us in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and even too, with even going up to the federal level or Commonwealth level, I mean, as well, because we touched on imperialism, land imperialism before, but it just comes to show you too that how far divorced those major parties are from the common people, because they are actually on a pro-imperialist drive of doing the bidding on behalf of US imperialism, like Morrison government's attack on China, consistent. And so, like actually with the interview, the session we've done today with Dust, explain it, just how they came out. The state of affairs is actually getting worse. And it's not in our best interest for that to happen. I mean, for obvious reasons. And I mean, now for anyone who produces wine and dependent on the Chinese market, now high and dry, because now China turned around and slapped a massive tariff on and accusing the Australian government of dumping again. But it certainly doesn't help when you've got the likes of Peter Dutton or anyone else out there accusing China of this COVID-19, calling it the Chinese virus or whatever it is, or Chinese flu. And I mean, that to me is just disgraceful. That's just like unnecessarily revving the whole country up against us for no reason whatsoever. But they're to actually try and have some sort of aggressive proxy war against them. And I actually feel the US is using us as a bit of a proxy in this as well.
Absolutely, and it's indicative, really, of a country that of a nation, or rather a system that's in decay, and of course the reason that the US really hates China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Syria, Cuba, is that those countries are surviving independently of imperialism. They're also competing with imperialism. They are competitors, and not in the sense of becoming more that they want world domination or they want to take over the world, but they are shrinking the markets of US imperialism by creating economic blocks against US imperialism, or in defense of other countries that are independent, such as China trading with Venezuela when the US has a economic war against Venezuela, and the same with Cuba. Iran is dealing with Venezuela and Cuba, supplying oil and so on, or whatever the case may be, and the US hates it because it cannot control those nations.
Yeah.
And And so, of course, the more that the US also, the more that the big contradiction is that the more the US slaps economic war and sanctions on countries, the less markets it has. And so the more aggressive it's becoming because it's losing ground, it's losing its power.
Yeah.
And in that vein, and for that reason, the real threat of war, of another world war, is actually quite high, because it's a system that's being backed into a corner by its own contradictions, and it's coming out fighting. We have to be aware of that. We have to be consciously aware that China is not the enemy. China is not an imperialist nation. It's not a capitalist nation. It's a independent socialist nation that's doing things its own way. And Venezuela is the same. Cuba is the same. And these countries need our support. In fact, we should be trying to establish ties with any country on a win-win, mutually respectful, basis for trade relations. But of course, Australia supports the US. It's our major ally in terms of war. China is our major ally in terms of trade. But America's our ally in terms of war. And so we constantly align ourselves with US imperialism, and it's the wrong side. It's the wrong side of history, if you like, because the US is dying. The US, in terms of an economic system, in terms of a military system, it's still the largest in the world. But in terms of an economic system and its economic powerhouse, it's dying.
Yeah.
And we will be on the wrong side of history if we continue to support US imperialism.
That's right. Well, it's interesting. Also, if the US decline tomorrow completely, where's it leave Australia then? And someone actually commented with me a little while back and said if that happened, there's probably two things. Well, obviously, imagine our people here, because see which direction, but our comprador ruling class here will be looking for another country to be subjected to. We'll have to find someone else. We'll have to find someone else. Instead of like, no, we need to stand on our own 2 feet, develop our own economic policies and our own independent, our peaceful foreign policies as well as win-win cooperation. I know we talked about the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership today. Well, so here's the contradiction. Now Australia's involved in it, and here we are as part of the US imperial bloc. I don't know what's going to happen there. And then also this whole trade situation with China. I don't know how it's going to work, because it's they've signed onto a document. Imagine if China all of a sudden had the complete upper hand over Australia. Sorry, you can't do that. You can't do this. We're going to see you on here. I think that thing's a joke. Well, no, I'll retract that. It's not a joke, but I just think the whole thing's a farce, in the sense where, well, the only people who are really going to benefit out of it is going to be someone in the ruling class somewhere along the line. So some of these deals are going to have been made because, and I don't think with China and their role in all this, well, they obviously want to lift their people out of poverty further. They've still got a lot of work to do in developing on a win-win cooperation. But this is not like a genuine type of socialist type of regional economic plan, and this is more or less it's for the multinationals to see which way they can further exploit other countries, which is the main concern, including ours as well. So it'd be interesting now over the course of the next 12 months to see how how it turns its course. But this whole idea of blaming China for this and that and everything else, and gearing us up so much hatred and stirring up racism as well. It certainly is a deliberate ploy to detract us from the whole economic problems and capitalism as well. And realise that, we've got to find someone to blame for our economic ills, and all that won't we blame China? Well, in fact, China never marched in this country and seized it all. They didn't declare war on us. They didn't point guns to their heads. They didn't take our jobs from us. It was actually the capitalist class that does that and did that. And I kept trying to keep reminding people that's who really did it, on behest of our own very respected governments allowing it to happen. So It's interesting when people go, oh, made in China was made over there. Well, hang on, why China's been singled out? Let's look at Bhutan, let's look at Singapore, let's look at India, let's look at Korea, and Japan as well, and other countries around the world. A lot of our manufactured goods come from. So, I think it's been deliberately done. So we've got a scapegoat to play by one to distract us, but also possibly gear us up for a war against China, with a war which we will not win. We would actually lose big time, and China wouldn't even need to attack us. They'll just cut our shipping supply off, and that's it. They're gone. They don't need to do.
Yeah, and of course the US is ramping up the rhetoric against China, and Australia is following suit. The US has something like 22 bases surrounding China.
Yep.
And if that's not a threat to the national sovereignty of a country, well, I don't know what is. And of course, then now in the Philippines and so on, they've got, even though, a few years ago, the Philippines removed or got rid of a couple of major US bases in the Philippines, now they're ramping up again with Duterte, who supports the US and so on. So more bases are coming into the Philippines. We're ramping up in Australia. New Zealand, I think, has sent warships into the South China Sea. And so, the encirclement of China is definitely occurring. We shouldn't be, we should make no bones about that, for sure, that the threat, it's a real threat against China, both in terms of a Cold War propaganda war against China and the threat of a real war. And we need to understand that if we don't understand what's occurring, it's quite possible that we would then, even as workers, which we have no interest and we gain nothing from wars, but because of a propaganda war, we feel as though we will be against China, we will oppose China, and therefore we will be quite happy for Australia to participate in a war against China.
Yeah.
And so we have to be really careful that we explain and that we understand that China is not the enemy. China is not an imperialist nation. China is not a capitalist nation that is trying to dominate the world or take over the space of US imperialism. It's not the case. It has no interest, and China has not invaded any country since it became a socialist country. So it's we have to explain that so that workers in Australia understand that China is not the enemy, and that we do not want to support a war against China, either a Cold War or a very real war against China.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that China's been a physical threat where they've never invaded everyone ever since 1949. Actually, they've never invaded anyone at all, for far as I know, especially the last 200 years.
Exactly.
They're the ones that have been invaded either by the British, Portuguese, the Japanese as well. I think some German at one stage. But yeah, I mean, Hong Kong was that classic case in point. That was basically set up to allow the drug trade to go rife. Because the Chinese at the time, royal families there was a drug issue in China amongst the peasantry. They didn't want to buy opium off the British. Basically, they said, no, we don't want your opium. And so, what the British Empire did, declare war on it, and then declare war on China. And ever since they suffered immensely under that. And it's interesting now. It's even now seeing how they're meddling in the affairs. Hong Kong's not a separate country from China; it's part of China now. They're just a province of China that has its own, some of its own self-rule, except for foreign policy, military, and a few other things. There's the two systems, one country policy. China's put on hold for their Hong Kong. But the thing is, for those people who have been doing all those big violent protests in Hong Kong, they've been basically doing the whim of US imperialism to destabilise the region, and also the same time, they're saying that, well, they're getting this mentality that Hong Kong people are different from Chinese, and they're not. They actually are Chinese. Majority of people in Hong Kong supports China, not the other way around.
Yeah.
This minority that's trying to cause all this disruption. And this minority is also representing of that class that's lost a lot of its financial grip in China, where it's all moved to Shanghai now, and now it's in Beijing. So, yeah, but Hong Kong's not this little outpost of the British Empire anymore, nor is it its own separate country. It was interesting, we're watching that interview Dust James did with the Chinese comrade from Taiwan.
It's very good.
And it was a communist from there. And it's actually interesting, Taiwan has still got a communist party. It's not called, it's actually called the Communist Party of China. And then Taiwan, and they've got the old type of flags up there and everything, and they sometimes they're quite an energetic crowd. But yeah, when they say there's no such thing as Taiwanese, no, they class themselves as Chinese. It's actually known as the Republic of China, not the Republic of Taiwan.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he raised some interesting points about the Hong Kong side of things, and I think it's we'll have a look around with all the players being actively involved here, and those Hong Kong protesters were reactionary. They were CIA backed. They were trying to do everything to destabilise Chinese society, and obviously, but what our media and everywhere else didn't explain, the overall and vast majority of people living in Hong Kong support mainland China. Seeing what the imperialists are up to, trying to destabilise China. But the thing is, what they won't mention either, that the imperialists will lose on this, because Chinese culture is pretty strong and they will unite together. I don't think, I think if anyone attacks China physically with any type of war, well, they lose severely as well. So, And the other thing is, sorry to jump in there, with China, like with the Uyghurs and all this, like especially with the liberal media such as the ABC denunciating how they treat the Uyghur people. Now, China's had an issue for many years, and that was a problem going back to the Deng years and just before with the Gang of Four about, but he had supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviets, because there was still a big falling out then. And of course, they did that. Now the problem is they've got a problem on their hand with terrorism, but all the Uyghur people are not persecuted. It's actually quite a myth. And the fact is, this is what the liberal media is not telling us. Well, you're good standing up about the Muslim minority, the Uyghur people in China. Why aren't you standing up for the people who've been in Syria, of Iran, and Iraq, Libya, which were predominantly the predominant religions Islam, and even Palestine as well? Well, to me, that's a complete and utter hypocrisy. So then, oh no, that's good. That's a good thing that we destroy those countries, and brave soul, brave heroes going there. Oh, Chinese trying to deal with terrorism, about bad people, this minority. And I thought, oh yeah, the hypocrisy of it all. And I'm actually one person, if he ever comes across this video, I don't care, but it's called Stan Grant, the university professor, and he does a lot of media commentary. And he's Indigenous, or one of the first people, and he's got the gump to get up there and talk about Western liberal values to China. And I'm thinking, mate, those same Western liberal values that destroyed your people. And I talk about in America, they call that type of person Uncle Tom. He'd be the sort of person who would support the Confederacy and that during the US Civil War and all that, and all these other things in China. People. And so, it's not just the Murdoch empire going back to media. Sorry to jump all over the place, but even the liberal media too. It's just to see explicit in all this.
Yeah. I've got to correct myself. I said that there were 22 bases, and I have no idea where I pulled that figure from, but it's actually 400 bases around that are surrounding China. So quite a few more than what I said. Yeah. And I think people forget also that there are problems that are endemic to the world. So things like unemployment, things like poverty, things like education, things like living in remote areas, things like contradictions amongst nationalities, all of those types of things are endemic throughout the world. It's a problem here in Australia. It's a problem in America. It's a problem everywhere. The difference is, how do you deal with those problems? And while in America, those problems are escalating. They're getting worse. There's nothing being done to deal with those problems.
Yeah.
Because there's no profit to be made out of fixing those problems. It's like trying to fix bridges. They don't give a shit about the bridges in America. Things are falling down. Roads are being unpaved so that they can pave other areas. The water's unclean because because they can't afford it, but because there's no profit in it.
Yeah.
So these social problems are problems that are endemic in the world, and yet whenever the socialist world has these problems, all of a sudden it's a reflection on the type of society. Oh, it's socialism's a problem. Oh, it's China is the problem, or the Chinese people are the problem because they can't deal with this problem. And yet, when we can't deal with a problem, which we in Australia, we're not dealing with First Nations people. We're not dealing with unemployment and poverty. Our privatization of so many of our social services and so on is creating way more problems than it used to.
Yeah.
But nobody's pointing the finger here saying, "Oh, look at that! Look at that! This is capitalism. This is the problem of capitalism."
Yeah.
No, we just say, "Oh, we blame. Oh, it's the Liberal Party. Oh, we blame the Labor Party. Oh, we'll blame the Greens because they're green and they want to destroy everything and just be all green."
Yeah, they want to give us
that's not really the case.
Yeah, all that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. We're only we need to stop looking at things on a superficial level and start really examining what the problem is.
Yeah.
What's causing these problems? It's not individual parties. It's not individual people. It's not individual nations or genders or race or any. The people the system is causing the problem. And the system needs to make profit, and without profit, it won't do anything. And so, we're finding more and more that this is becoming more obvious as as capitalism or as the system is starting to break down more and more.
Yeah. The other thing, actually, there's a lot more foreclosures as well. Whole working families losing their houses.
Exactly.
That, of course, will form the family breakup in the first place. I mean, in regional Australia, there's going to be a big growth here. And I would see what the federal and the respective state governments are trying to do with housing, keep it going. But people are not going to have the money to still be able to afford these things anymore. So we're going to have all these empty houses, not because people can live in. So profit can be made, but no profit is going to be made. But people are going to be living out of their cars and caravan parks or wherever, sharing, whole families sharing with each other family. It's just going to cause a massive breakdown. And of course, obviously, from that as well, suicide rates will go up. Drug and alcohol problem, which is a massive problem here in Australia. I've seen it right through regional areas. There's jokes made around, like even cities like Bendigo, but even like Shepparton, being the crack capital of regional Royal Mildura and all that. You see it, and it's just obviously, these people once had probably full-paying, good quality jobs, or towns that had that now, and this is where. And what we're seeing now is the societal problems. I mean, the drug problem itself, it should be regarded as a health issue and a social issue to a certain degree, not as a law and order one. But it's causing major problems, and it's creating whole families to break down altogether. And more prisons being built, more people in it. When they're going about these prison rehabilitation programs and everything, to me, it's a bit of a farce. There's more people going in than coming out. Well, you know what I mean. They're coming out, but there's more people still going in. And really, what I'm seeing here is like we're marching straight forward to a low-wage police state, a political industrial system, and keep everyone casual, part-time, hardly any rights and conditions, and we used to enjoy if we were full-time even, but even that's started to go by the wayside, and take it or leave it. And basically that's what's coming at the end of the day. Actually, one thing was quite interesting, I would see how the state government here in Victoria put 5 days sick day or personal leave for casuals. Obviously, libertarians and of course the Liberal Party and all that, and libertarians and all these other knobs are going jumping up and down. This and this is. This is socialism. Socialism the problem. Wrong again. It's not. Not, but then again, they're also showing how many are working class. Well, as soon as you start getting a few little bit rights, they want to just take it off you straight away. So I can see this where we're marching to. As this, we gear up for trying a more aggressive war, trying to be involved in things. But here in the home front, while people are foreclosing and losing everything, we're marching straight into a low-wage police state. What's next? We'll just build these massive type stadiums so they can, for everyone to live in there. You can only come out when you go to work. You're going back in at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's very interesting and very scary times for a lot of people, and in the way, I think the only way forward really is to start building these grassroots movement that offer an alternative to the system that we've got, or an alternative and a challenge to the system that we've got. Don't rely on we can't rely on our parliamentarians, we can't rely on our well-educated, greased up politicians that know exactly what to say, even though they don't say anything at all. And then as soon as they get elected, they break every promise anyway. So, time and time again, history's proved this to us. So why we continue to support the system instead of trying to develop something that's an alternative or that's a challenge to the system, is something that we, as individuals, we need to start thinking about, and collectively, we need to start thinking about that as well. And I think that was the good thing about standing as a candidate with the, with the backing of Trades Hall and part of a movement to try and make a difference. I think there's a lot of things that we could have done differently. No point really just putting individuals into a council to try and change a vote here, there, and somewhere. Rather, perhaps the challenge could have been, we're going to take over the entire council, and maybe in 4 years' time, that might be something that will be discussed. So right now we need to be doing this kind of grassroots work that says, okay, let's get together 10 people that can really challenge this council, because in Hobson Bay there's nine councillors. 3 in each different ward, so it's 3 times 3, and so let's take the entire council over. Let's not be happy to have one councillor in there that really probably isn't going to make much difference, but let's get together and start really taking things over. And I think the important thing of not being along party lines, not being dictated, or not dictated, but not being restrained, if you like, by particular party politics is important in a way, because the idea of us coming together with similar ideas and uniting on those similar ideas is important, and to have differences is important, but to be able to unite on something that is similar, things that we can unite on, they need to be the important things, not what's different about us.
Exactly.
And so we have to, kind of like the PSUV in Venezuela. They have lots of different political parties in the PSUV, but the one thing that they are all united on is that they are opposed to US imperialism. They are opposed to their sovereignty being taken over by another country, so that's the kind of place that we need to get to at some point.
Yep.
Celebrate our differences, but unite on the really important issues.
It's an exciting place, Venezuela. I like to visit it.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. I probably wouldn't want to leave. Stay there. But it's actually interesting too, because with Governor, someone told me they made this observation. It's probably quite true between the two major parties. Someone might go, one of those parties might come up with a great idea to do something, But the other party just opposes it, not because it's a great, they disagreed with the idea. It's just because they oppose it because that's what they've got to do, and it's like, why? If someone comes up with a brilliant idea, we should do this, we should do X, and everyone's going, well, actually, that's actually a lot of common sense. A lot of it should happen, yes, and it's going to benefit society. But then all of a sudden oppose it to the hell of it, So Yeah, it's just it is crazy. And you're right. I've been been constrained by party politics, internal things. Because if you are a member of a particular party that might also form government, state and federal, and they want to, and some developer wants to come along, and local government want to demolish heritage buildings and build some horrible tacky thing that no one will like, except for him because he wants to make profit off it. So you guys oppose it on the state government and comes in, oh, no, and everything else, but you're wrapped over the coals. Oh, that's not party line, how dare you do it? So,
yeah.
Well, hey, this has been a good discussion. I'm just aware about the time as well.
Sure. Yep.
3:30. And that, but look, it's been really good to do this interview. I'll try and do a few more over the course of time as well. Something a bit later on this afternoon. But is there anything else you'd like to add or say?
No, I think I've said as much as I want to say at this stage. Yeah. For anybody listening, I think get involved. I think get involved, no matter what the level is that you get involved in. Just get involved.
Yeah.
Start to challenge your own way of thinking about things as well. I know it's difficult. We want to believe that the system is capable of change. We want to believe that we live in a just society. We want to believe these things, but the reality is that we don't. We don't, and there are many examples of why that is the case, and there's many examples of how that is proved to us that we don't live in a just society. So we've got to ask ourselves, well, how are we going to get to that just society that we deserve? We create the wealth. We are the only ones that create the wealth in this country. And yet we don't have a share in that wealth, or the share that we have is not proportional to the amount of wealth that we're creating. So, we've got to challenge the whole profit concept and our place in society.
Very well said too, and I totally agree with that. Well, look, we'll leave it there and for there. And look, once again, I thank you for coming on board. We'll do this pre-recorded session, and obviously this will load up within, I don't know how long these things take to load up, but once it gets loaded up, people can come and watch it and give their opinions as well. But it's obviously, look, for everyone out there as well, look, it's vitally important to get involved. Get up for your feet, get on your feet, and just get out there and get involved. As like I say to him, for those who, a member of a union, join your union, get involved there one way or the other. We definitely need to build the union movement up into back to a proper fighting force, not just sort of complain about how bad it is. But even too, with elections or any other type of community group, working class organisation, it's time to get involved. It's like as Caleb Morgan said, we've got to get out of the movement and get into the masses. And it's a perfect opportunity now to do so, and I think I think it'd be right for the picking. I think people are willing to listen as well. I've got a funny feeling when I've even talked to people, they will listen. They might not agree straight away, they might not interpret things straight away, but eventually people click and they go, "Oh, he was right," or "She was right." Well, thank you. Well, thank you. Nice. And look, spend the rest of your day on a nice day. I believe it's a lot cooler in Melbourne than it is up here, although it's been a lovely day today. Thank Christ to suit over the heat and humidity. But but we're coming into summertime, there's a lot more to come. So, look, once again, thank you. And for all the listeners out there and viewers, dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you don't fight, you lose.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.